Hello everyone, this is Malik, and on behalf of Pentera and 451 Research, which is now a part of S&P Global Market Intelligence, I would like to welcome you all and say thank you for attending today's webinar titled Never Trust, Always Validate, Security Readiness for 2022. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. To ask a question, simply type it in the question box on your screen, and we will get to as many as we can during the Q&A session. The presentation slides are available for the download in the resource section in the console. And finally, the on-demand version of this webinar would be available shortly after the live event concludes. Leading off today's discussion will be Erin Sherrill, who is Senior Research Analyst at 451 Research. Joining Erin is Maur Franco, who is Senior Director Product Marketing at Pantera. And with that, I'll turn it over to Erin to kick off today's session.
Hey, thanks, Malik. Hey, and good day, everyone. As Malik mentioned, I'm Erin Sherrill, Senior Research Analyst, 451 Research. Hey, thanks for joining us today. I think we have a really engaging and timely session. So, let's get moving, and let's kick things off by looking at the state of cybersecurity in organizations around the globe. As you probably know, at 451 Research, we conduct hundreds of surveys and studies each year, and we generate millions of data points on a variety of topics, including AI, the cloud, networking, data centers, IoT, digital transformation, and of course, information security, just to name a few. The data from those surveys and those studies, they really emphasize the state of cybersecurity in many organizations. And, that really boils down to this. Threats are everywhere, and security teams say they're underprepared. At the same time, security teams are dealing with an assortment of siloed security products. They have a lack of visibility across their entire IT ecosystem. Most don't have a SOC, many still lack a SIEM. Those that do have those, well, they're inundated with a growing volume of alerts and noise. They're unable to navigate, to investigate, to respond all the alerts they receive. They're lacking expertise in many critical areas, especially cloud and threat detection, incident response. And you can see a lot of these challenges that we've outlined here, many of these pain points, user behavior, endpoint security, malicious software and ransomware. A lot of these really line up with the top strategic security objectives that many of them have. And you see endpoint security and securing cloud environments. So, they're trying to address these challenges with a variety of different tools and approaches. And Mayor, I think this really just immediately takes us to our first data point for today. And, this is something you and I have discussed several times over this past year.
Yes, thanks, Aaron. One of the things, and this relates exactly to the points you kind of laid out in the previous slide, and there's no shortage of security controls out there. So many things, and majority of them are a critical component of an operational security operations. But one of the things we are seeing today from Pantera point of view is that you've implemented them, but you're not really sure whether they're operating as intended. Whether the day you operated it or a month after, or with every IT change, or with your hybrid infrastructure. If it's relevant for on-prem, it may not relate to a cloud. And one of the things that we strongly advise our customers is to not just think about what next tool you need to bring into your stack, but how existing controls you have in place can increase your confidence so that when a threat arises, you're able to actually know that you're ready for that type of an attack and your controller operating as intended.
Mayor, let me ask you just a question about that. So, what are some of the biggest deficiencies that you see when it comes to those security controls? What are organizations seeing most frequently that is, decreasing the efficacy of their tools?
That's a great question, Aaron. Many times, I would say that it's misconfiguration. Sometimes we say, okay, the tool cannot do X and Y, but the tools have advanced a lot for the past couple of years, from a better prevention, a better detection, a better control. But many times it's one change in configuration that is not straightforward, And that's why we see when we go to a customer A, it's working as intended, great job. Although we go to customer B and we see the same stack not operating as intended. So many times it's as simple as misconfigurations. Second option is there's customers who implement that in a preventative mode versus detection mode, and therefore, as a result, are late to respond and trust a blue team to be able to go and trigger an incident and elevate the priority of that amongst all the alerts that they get from different disparate sources. So that's a couple of things that I kind of see as the main reasons.
Yeah, I think a lot of these data points that we're going to show throughout today really help just kind of solidify what you're talking about and why that's occurring. And one of the main areas that we see is that the environment that security teams are tasked to protect, well, it's becoming increasingly complex. It's disparate and it's expansive. So the cloud is the epitome of this increasing complexity. Most organizations are moving towards a hybrid IT architecture composed of multiple clouds, including infrastructure as a service and software as a service, traditional on-site infrastructure and hosted services. And in fact, over half of organizations indicated that their workloads will primarily be executed in the public cloud by the end of next year. And at the same time, move to the next slide. At the same time, organizations are modernizing operations and they're reinventing how they work. They're adopting new technologies and processes really faster than most IT and security teams can adapt. So, this means that those security and IT teams, they're dealing with constant change, disruptions, increased risk, more data to decipher, more noise, more competing priorities. And, it just becomes a continually more complex and more difficult challenge. And, this is kind of an unnerving thought that, I saw the other day. If you think that this rate of change that we're dealing with today seems blistering and hard to keep up with, it's probably likely at the slowest pace we're ever going to experience in our lifetime moving forward. So this rapid adoption of new and emerging technologies, this decentralization of IT, the continued movement towards a hybrid and IT infrastructure composed of all these multiple clouds, this is all creating an environment that's increasingly complex, disparate, and expansive, like we just mentioned. And, I think this really leads to that second data point, Mayor, and this is another topic you and I have discussed at great length.
Yeah, and I love that. If you think today's fast, imagine what's going to happen tomorrow. I really like that note, Aaron, and I cannot agree more. We talked about security controls efficacy, but many times as we're looking at the new normal with remote workforce, we're looking at the new normal with a distributed enterprise across your hybrid stack, as you mentioned, when you're on this journey to a cloud-only solution, when you're in this hybrid state for a long period of time and not plan to completely change that, is how are you looking at your complete attack surface? And one of the things we see today as we think about how can we prep you to be better ready in 2022 is first knowing your attack surface. Whether it's your internal in the concept of assumed breach, what are the assets that an adversary may be able to reach and from there expose vulnerability and progress the attack, versus all the assets that are available from an outside-facing public access that the adversary may use in order to get in the first place. And the way we want to make sure that you are aware and ready is when you look at that holistically. Don't just think about a point in time, I only care about this crown jewel environment, because it's the full end-to-end attacker path that may lead the attacker to that crown jewel location. So you definitely need to look at your attack surface completely. And one of the things that I like to say when we think about attack surface is, if you don't go and know it and validate it, someone else will do it for you. And that's what we're seeing a lot that's happening today.
So, one of the things I've seen when it comes to attack surface is most organizations greatly underestimate their attack surface. And I'm sure this is something you've seen. The attack surface tended to be that well-defined corporate perimeter. But now it's not just that, it's the cloud. And really that corporate perimeter is disappearing because now we have work from home that's increasing because of the pandemic. But it's also APIs and identity and IoT and what are some of the other areas where a lot of organizations are missing when it comes to the attack surface?
That's a great question, Aaron. Again, one of the things we're seeing right now is security, I want to say for the past decade plus, has many times was an afterthought or a business disabler, not able to move as fast as the business desire, and therefore create this gap where the engineering team operate and say, okay, I'm going to do it on my own because I need to get my business moving forward, and creates the ideal problem we see a lot today, which is shadow IT, which exactly to your point, you assume you know all your assets. But then there is if you ask 4 people about how many assets and endpoints, you're going to get 5 different responses. And that's exactly, and we see shadow IT right now as one of the major problems that the adversary use in order to get into the organization in the beginning.
Yeah, that's great. So we started out talking about how organizations have reported that, threats are everywhere, that their security teams are underprepared. We talked about how IT ecosystems are becoming more complex, diverse, and disparate. But unfortunately, we've also found that organizations are having to deal with all these challenges with very lean security teams. Now, the expertise shortage, I know it's been well publicized over the past decade, but what we have found in our research is the problem may be worse than most organizations realize. Finding expertise and capacity needed to respond to this ever-increasing volume of security events, it can be overwhelming for even the most well-funded security programs. According to a recent 451 research survey, over half of organizations believe their staffing level is inadequate to handle the challenges their organizations are facing today. Yet, only about 14% said they plan to add to their security team in the coming year. Again, security teams remain very lean. In fact, 41% of small and mid-sized organizations, they don't have any information security professionals on staff. And about 60% of mid-size, they have less than 10 full-time employees dedicated to information security. So, that's not nearly enough to monitor and support an organization 24/7. However, more people, more talent, more security tools, that's not enough. I think recent attacks that we've seen, well-publicized attacks, they underscore just how difficult it is for an organization. Even those organizations that are well-funded, that have ample expertise and robust security stack, just how difficult it is to gain visibility across a dynamic IT ecosystem and then consistently detect indicators of compromise. So, let me kind of drill this home a little bit more. So, in light of the lack of human resources and expertise, the data around having a security operations center, it's not really surprising. But I bring this up because detecting indicators of compromise and responding to threats 24/7, one of the main roles of a SOC, it really is an indicator of the security maturity of an organization. However, only about 46% of organizations report having a SOC, and not surprisingly, it's lower among smaller organizations, about 26%, and larger, about 63% in larger organizations. So, of those that have a SOC, just over half are staffing it solely with internal sources, about a quarter are outsourcing to an MSP or a SOC provider, an MDR provider, and about 20%, as you can see on the chart, are doing a mix of internal and outsourced resources. That's because building and staffing and managing a SOC, it's just a daunting task that, really it often fails to deliver the expected outcomes. The problem is that I think a lot of organizations report they have a SOC in place. It may be a little bit aspirational because, again, as you can see on the chart here, about a quarter of those only operated during their business hours. So that means an attack that begins at the beginning, say the long weekend, well, that could go unaddressed for at least 3 to 4 days. And with about 3/4 of organizations reporting that they have less than 10 full-time employees dedicated to information security, well, that's just not enough to staff a SOC 24/7 and handle all the demands of digital transformation, compliance, audits, and all these other challenges. And, and then at the same time, we're finding that security talent enterprises have on staff, well, they tend to be generalists and they lack deep expertise that's really critical to a SOC operation. And I know, Myron, your security point, this third one, it really addresses many of these challenges I just talked about.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to look at the shortage of security skill set. And I think this is, the entire security as a community are all out to kind of be able to breach that gap, but it will take time. And one of the things that we advise our customers to kind of think about is how you can bridge certain types of actions that your team are heavy on manual effort, are taking more time than they need, so that they can increase their security maturity and take another steps or either having a SOC or increasing the maturity of their SOC through automation. Now, many times, I don't like when it's being said, is we say, use this automation tool to replace your employee. That's all mumbo jumbo. Well, we all know that. The shortage is so big. The way we think about automation and the way we can envision for the future of security readiness is how this can better augment your team. So if I look at penetration testing as a simple example, how everything that you're doing against a specific environment, trying to sniff credentials, trying to take action, identify if there's any lateral movement options to take actions on your environment, and let automation do it while you start building different security strategies of an incident response plan, of different security, or if we go back to the previous point about your attack surface, what is it that you're not seeing? And that's where I believe automation is something that should take us forward to 2022, not replace, just add, and every tool evaluated as part of your security stack must have an automation component to it.
I agree. And one of the things I have found in talking with organizations about automation, I think it's looked at in a very narrow scope. And they're kind of looking at automating very specific tasks that are, very rudimentary. But really, the automation tools that are available out there can enable security teams and IT teams to automate to a much greater extent. Like you said, to enable a security person to be able to scale multiple fold. Take, for example, threat detection and response, to be able to automate the ability to do all the information gathering for an analyst to make more investigative and informed decisions is really critical. Is that some of the things that you've seen in your experience with customers about not taking a broad enough approach to automation?
Yep, exactly that. I can give, I don't know, if we have the full day, I will give you like 50 examples of that. I'll give you maybe two. One of the things that we've seen on the threat detection, to your point, is threat hunting. At the end of the day, threat hunting is going and find a needle in the haystack, assuming you've been breached. However, if you look at the sum of time being spent on threat hunting, is you're spending 90% of the time hoping to find that needle, but you may have not. And that time spent should have been spent elsewhere while trying to find, through automation, that needle so you can initiate the investigation from there. Another example can be you've done some penetration testing, automated red teaming, and you were able to find, again, we're outside of the kill chain. We brought the kill chain to you, and we found the compromised endpoints, and we find the compromised user credentials. Now you can say, let's open a ticket to IT, let them ask the user if it's been compromised, while through automation, you can perform automated reset password and automatically reduce the risk. That is just two examples that security operations teams can take and start implementing today.
Yeah, that's great. That's great insight. Just a moment ago, we talked about the lack of staff and how most security teams are running very lean. At the same time, the security talent expertise have on staff, as I mentioned, tend to be generalist. and they're lacking deep expertise. And this is one of the things we have found through some of our surveys. Cloud platform expertise is really in short supply among security teams. And as we've shown earlier, with more and more of our workloads moving to the cloud, that's becoming a problem. We're also seeing significant deficiencies in incident response, digital forensics, threat detection. The lack of talent, the lack of enough human resources, the lack of a SOC, the increasing complexity of an organization's IT ecosystem. We couple that with the growing volume of destructive threats. Well, all of this is really leading to an increasing number of security issues that are resulting in outages for organizations. Outages caused by security issues are now tied with software issues and are quickly closing in on hardware-related outages. And it's not particularly good news, especially as the downtime costs continue to increase. So you can see here in the chart, the darker blue is what organizations are reporting downtime was costing them for last year in 2020. And now in 2021, those costs continue to move up. And I expect that we'll see that shift to continue to increase in 2022 as well. And the fallout and the impact from an outage, it's widespread. It's ranging from lost productivity and data loss to lost revenue and damaged reputation. In short, the stakes are high. Costs are increasing to deal with these outages. And unfortunately, security issues, they're becoming a more common source of outages than ever before. So, now that I've brought down the mood, what can organizations do here?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I actually want to say, we see the same stats as your research shows, and that's kind of an eye-opener. However, I can say also at the same time that many organizations are doing a lot of good stuff that are making them better hardened and better resilient to threats. Whether it's applying a zero trust architecture, whether it's applying the right controls in place and validating them. So yes, at the same time, there is a downtime, there is problems, but at the same time, security as a whole is getting better. And you mentioned the complexity leading to security issues, leading to downtime. One of the things that frustrate me a lot is the perceived that an organization can always be patch perfect. And that is a problem. And if I can take the analogy to a decade concept that we introduced, alert fatigue. And in the alert space, we understood a long time ago, you cannot just solve all alerts. You have 20,000 alerts. Now, the question is how you go about focusing on the most critical alerts. Critical not just by the technique that's being used by the adversary, but what is potentially the root cause and the possible impact. And I think that to your point about complexity and issues is what we're seeing on the vulnerability front is focusing more on the vulnerability versus the exposure versus the impact, and how this kind of patch and mold doesn't really take us to where we need to be. So I think that what is critical for us to change immediately to have a better, let's call it better 2020 security readiness, is look at weaknesses, not just vulnerabilities, exposures as a whole, with a root vulnerability and an impact in mind. So you now know once you implemented the fix, while you apply the patch, that you got the biggest bang for your buck in terms of better hardened and resiliency and readiness for your security operation.
And that's great. And you talked about complexity, and I've mentioned complexity several times already today. But, I think our data has shown that complexity is one of the main causes of security issues that many security teams are facing today. And this chart is a great example, right? So, you can see here, 82% of organizations are leveraging multiple endpoint solutions today, with almost half using 3 or more, and really this the bottom number is surprising. 20% are using more than 5. multiple endpoint solutions create complexity, they increase opportunity for errors, and we addressed that I think on our first point, and that's through misconfigurations, outdated solutions, gaps where endpoints are not really covered at all. The list goes on, and even though we have this complexity going on, most IT security teams say that they are confident that their endpoint security solutions can prevent ransomware. So in fact, about 92% believe that their endpoint security solutions are very effective or somewhat effective. But when we ask this question a different way, how would you respond to a ransomware attack? Only about a third said that their endpoint security tool would interrupt the attack. And a majority of organizations said they would likely have to restore from a backup in the event of a ransomware attack, meaning that probably means the attack was successful, right? And their endpoint solution didn't really prevent it as they originally thought. And, we also asked organizations about their confidence level, about their ability to recover from a ransomware attack. And only about half are extremely or very confident. And, the other half, not so sure. It's really hard for organizations to know for sure that the tools, the processes, the procedures that they have in place, that they're going to work as intended. And they're not really going to know until an actual attack has occurred. I know you have a lot of great info on this. We've discussed this several times.
Yeah. I love that you point out the confidence and the for sure statement. And that's one of the key things that when we come and talk to security practitioners is you can see their assurance level is not where it needs to be. It's a lot about, I think it can block. I think I'm seeing the entire matter attack table that's relevant to my environment. And the way that we want to introduce a change to 2022 is to think about how can you validate that these assumptions that you have in place around the efficacy of your controls, about the visibility of your entire attack surface, if I go back to previous notes, if I look at the right vulnerabilities that can really take the organization to its knees, and to take the adversary tactics and techniques and put it in your environment in as real as possible, so that now you brought the Resident Evil, the patient zero to your environment, and you can now take a conclusion about what would happen if. Was I able to discover that threats? Were my controls able to prevent it? Or later down the attack kill chain, able to detect it and my blue team applied an immediate response action? Whether I was able to link it back to how the adversary was able to get in. What's my root vulnerability, as we say? What's the root weaknesses that was used for this type of attack? But the key thing, if I wrote here Emulate Resident Evil, just to kind of make a point, the thing is to think with your security readiness is how can you bring the attack kill chain to your network in a completely safe fashion before you have the adversary in, so that now when the adversary is in, you already validated your entire end-to-end operation, and you know whether you're how you rank against that specific threat or in general.
We saw earlier that most organizations don't have a SOC, but those that do, over half outsource those capabilities. So I'd imagine this would be a great opportunity to test the abilities of those outsourced security teams.
Yeah, cannot agree more. In your stats, it showed that maybe majority of the organizations, so they trust more and more in managed services, and this is what I call who's watching the watchers, and how can you hold them accountable to agreed upon SLAs on the one hand, to agreed upon tools and capabilities. And the MSSPs and MDR markets have been out there and helping a lot to bridge that security skill gaps through automation and through skill set. But they need to be accountable as well. So emulate a Resident Evil, you can think about it in known terms, is how can you apply a red team activity in your environment without the need to have a person on staff to do it for you, because you don't have that, but to still gain the advantage and the value of such an activity. That's something that security readiness as a whole must apply the offensive mindset as it's think about detection and response.
Yeah, that's great info. And let me just wrap up our this part of our time with just a couple more data points. What we have found is that in an attempt to close all these security gaps that we just talked about, improve the security posture of the organization, it really appears that many enterprises, they're trying to outspend the security challenges that are burdening their organization. So, they're really kind of taking the shotgun approach, right? They're increasing security spending in almost every part of their security programs. They're investing more of their budgets on hardware, software, services, and people. According to data from our recent Budgets and Outlook survey, spending on cybersecurity is growing at a rapid pace. 86% of organizations are planning to increase their security budgets by an average of 27%. Now, while the fact that security spending increasing, that's probably not surprising. The shifts in security spending may be. So outside of spending on people and hardware and software security tools, that's traditionally captured the largest portions of spend. We're seeing now that shift is now moving towards increased spending on security services. And now that's surpassed increased spending on hardware and software for security, and it's quickly closing in on planned increases for human resources. We also looked at this a little different way. We were also seeing increased spending on data security and endpoint security, regardless of whether that's a service, a hardware, software. And a lot of this is largely in response to the continued attacks related to things like ransomware. Again, it seems like organizations are taking this shotgun approach, right? Trying to head off challenges with more tools, but they're still unsure if what they have in place is working as intended. So, let's just kind of go back and revisit those 5 points that you made just a little while ago, Marion, and really kind of sum this all up when it comes to security readiness as we look forward to next year.
Thanks, Aaron. And I really like that note about the investment in services, because, again, it's going back to the skills gap that we just talked about. If I recap about the security readiness, and again, this is where I'm sure you all know the definition of insanity, and we keep on getting, budgets are going higher, we keep on getting more tools to our stack, but we're still seeing large, public announced data breaches happening left and right. So what is it that we can do different in 2020 that can really change our preparedness to hit by an attack? And the first thing, let me kind of do a quick recap on that. Evaluate the efficacy of your security controls. If I look at your budget, to your point, Aaron, there, I would not want you to add a single dollar for additional security controls before you evaluated the strength of the ones you have today and areas where you're lacking. But you now take not just a guesstimate, but more of an educated a decision, knowing how your organization may fare against a specific adversary. Second thing is how you can validate your entire attack surface. The business is moving fast. We have shadow IT happening. We have more leaked credentials that are found in the dark web. You need to understand that the adversaries are scanning your environment 24/7, trying to find that weakest link. Even if you're in defense in depth, zero trust, you're only as good as your weakest link. And that weakest link might be, we can go back to the Equifax breach with that public-facing web server that has the Struts vulnerability, where it was an easy target for a web shell. Make sure you have complete visibility, knowing everything you have on your external attack surface, on your internal attack surface across your cyber assets. Third item that we talked was automation. There is a skills short gap. You're probably preaching to the choir when I say you need more people. I know we all do. But training, retaining, hiring the skill set that you need for the specific task is a challenge today. So make sure as you introduce, based on the weaknesses you found, introduce a tool that helps you offload manual actions, not so you can replace teams or services, but actually so you can better improve your security program and think about the strategy of where you're lacking today in 2022 and how that can be improved. And the other two about prioritization, there's no shortage of problems. Make sure that you get the biggest bang for your buck and you're focusing with an impact notion before you're heading down to patching a weakness or a vulnerability. And think about introducing the offensive mindset into your environment to really validate your detection and response capabilities. Many times I think about the MITRE ATT&CK framework and how the defensive realm have really adopted that. But in an ideal world, it's the actually red team and offensive teams that are using the MITRE ATT&CK framework to as extensive as possible, so that the defensive control can actually know how to defend against those techniques and not just tell you, I saw it. Aaron, this is kind of anything to add on the security readiness before I go in and talk about kind of where Pantera fits in with the overall and the company to the research that you showed us?
No, I think these are five great points. And, I think I go back to, like you said a moment ago, not spend another dollar until you ensure that what you have in place is already working as intended. I think many organizations will find that it's very possible they may have 3 or 4 security tools that they may be able to replace with one with a broader range of coverage. I think we often see that a lot of security tools have a broader set of capabilities than most organizations have deployed. And really look to where you have a lot of niche security tools in place, and where those can be are in place, and where they can be replaced with maybe some more broader reaching security tools to eliminate the silos that are out there. Because we want to go back to talking about threat detection and response, being able to aggregate all those data from all those tools, and then to be able to respond appropriately, quickly and rapidly back to incidents that may occur. Having a fewer number of tools can really help expedite that. So outside of that, I think these are 5 great points that I agree with you that organizations really need to consider as we move into 2022.
Thanks, Aaron. And with that, I want to kind of shift just a little bit to Pantera, the company I work for, and how this can help you solve each one of the items to be able to make you better ready for 2022 and what is it that's about to hit your door. So if I just do a quick 100,000 view of what Pentera, our automated security validation platform is first thing, we want to make sure, as I mentioned, we look at your attack surface. We want to make sure you know what is your attack surface. But I do not just want to know your assets. That's not what we do. I want to use it as a means to an end to identify weaknesses, which leads me to finding those vulnerabilities. Now you probably think, oh, so that's yet another glorified vulnerability scanner? The answer is 100% no, because where a vulnerability scanner stops, giving you a 50,000 list of vulnerabilities, is where we actually proceed, focusing on the most exploitable ones that we have developed in-house to progress the attack. That's the end goal. Once we're in, we're going and taking this needle throughout every control you have in your infrastructure, whether it's your on-prem or from the on-prem to your cloud, through different ways that we have in place, to validate the controls the controls you've put in place to date. Again, going back to that point, showing you area of strength, you were able to stop it where it was lacking. So that once we found the complete attack map on the root vulnerability, how the attacker got in, and what is the possible impact, domain controller access, for example, out of all the attack maps, which one you should focus on first? Today's world is focusing on siloed CVSS scoring and different point in time. The approach that we've taken is, who's the adversaries that's usually doing those types of techniques? How widespread this is in terms of number of hosts and network access that we're able to get? How deep was I able to get, and what level of privileges do I now have? Which MITRE attack techniques were valuable for this specific attack chain? These are all coming together. So now you can take what we call the cost-effective remediation. That means that you're going to get, going back to that point, the biggest bang for the buck, spending time and giving your IT team the context they need to go about remediating the problem. So if I look in a nutshell, at a very high level about the Pantera automated security validation platform, it's all the way from identifying the assets, finding the problem, all the way to evaluating the impact and telling you how to go and remediate to reduce risk. And Aaron, you talked multiple times on the ransomware and the problem of downtime and how security is the main cause for downtime. And unfortunately, ransomware is taking a big part in it. So what we've done is we've introduced a new emulation framework. Again, if you remember, we now are bringing ransomware to your environment in a complete safe fashion. So what we've done, let me kind of quickly walk you through how we do it so you feel the confidence to start running this in your environment today. We took the best and the worst strains out there, Maze, REvil, Conti, all those variants that are out there creating havoc today, although REvil allegedly are being caught. Hopefully that's the truth. And we now trigger an attack operation of ransomware. And how does it look? We inject the process in real life on your environment, completely safe. We go and encrypt the data that we were able to find on specific hosts. Now you're saying safe and you're actually encrypting 100%? Yes. We want to make sure that your control in place that should be able to prevent that from happening are doing as intended. But if they're not, I want to show you what would have been the impact to your organization across how many endpoints data will be able to be encrypted. And you can now evaluate what type of data. Obviously, again, that data is a duplicate. Nothing is happening on real-life host. The user does not feel anything about that. Once you encrypted the data, we also try to exfiltrate that because guess what? I don't want to just validate your endpoint controls. I want to look at your entire security operation flow. So now we're saying an outbound egress communication so you can validate whether your threat intel is up to date because you're using known IOCs. You mentioned that, Aaron, like a known IOC is in the detection response world. I want to validate your firewall outbound communication and your end network detection response if you're there from a maturity perspective, even though network is encrypted, because many times it is excluded, as we all know, because encryption is getting more and more common. But again, we found the asset. We triggered the attack. So what? Now we want to give you the final output, telling you how your controls are behaving, what are the root vulnerabilities that allow this ransomware to get in the first place and across each one of the attack chain, and tell you, based on our findings, best way to guide remediation. So now you not just know and you have the data, you actually have a script, a cookbook of actual steps that you can take and remediate the problem right now, so that when Maze or any type of ransomware is in your environment, you know what would be the impact and risk associated with that and give a clear answer to your board and management team when they ask you this question. And just before we finish, for all of you on the call, thank you for your time here. Before we wrap up and open it for questions, today Pantera offers a free ransomware readiness assessment, which is a one-day proof of value. I know that many times when we say proof of value, you think about 30 days, long process. Our solution is completely agentless. And therefore, when we come in by noontime, you'll get the sense of what would have been the impact of ransomware if it's in your environment through a one-day proof of value. And with that, Aaron, I also want to kind of reach out back to the team and write your questions if you have any, and we will start taking questions. Back to you, Aaron.
Yeah, hey, Malik, Mayor, great question, or wrap up there. And hey, Malik, I'm going to pass this over to you. I know we already have several questions coming in, and I want to make sure we have time to answer all of those.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Aaron. So it's time for our Q&A session. Just a quick reminder for everybody, if you have a question, simply type it in the question box on your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can. First question is, we are currently outsourcing our Tier 1 security operations to MDR. MSSP, can Pantera validate both our security controls as well as the process applied by our service provider?
Thank you, Malik. That's a great question. Aaron, I can take it and you can add color. 100% yes. So when we think about security validation, looking at it and pinpointing a specific tool in your stack is better. It's good, but you need to think about your security operation as a people, process, technology. So yes, you need to identify the controls you have in place. You need to identify the process. In this case, the process of your MSSP MDR finding the data and notifying you in case there's a real threat out there. And the team actually validating that the team is giving you the right context in terms of the MSSP MDR. So to your question, long story short, 100%. Our customers are using that to evaluate controls they have today, but also evaluating managed service provider that they are using. What do you think, Aaron? Do you see that today from customers asking you about kind of best way to validate those services?
Yeah, I think that comes up often. It's not till, just like earlier, we were talking about the efficacy of the tools we have in place, and we're unsure if they're going to work until an attack occurs. I think the same thing applies to service providers. They're not sure if it's actually working until they get breached and they know it's not. So, if they're not breached or they don't have a security incident, they're assuming it's working. And, rather than assuming, you want to be sure. I've seen some organizations go about this through through their annual pen test, but again, that's once a year. That tends to be narrow in scope based on the time and the resources of the pen tester and how much money you're giving them to the scope of vulnerabilities that they're going to test. But having this continuous security testing, I think, is really important to see, are they going to be able to catch it every time and not just the one time that it occurred. So yeah, I think testing, as we've seen more spending going to security service providers, security services really helping supplement security teams that lack scale. And even, one of the things I didn't mention earlier, we're seeing a vast number of well-resourced, well-funded, large security teams. They're engaging security services at an even higher rate than mid-sized and small organizations. So, the rapid rise of security services, whether that's coming from your cloud provider, your data center provider, that's coming from your MSP, your MDR provider, all of those are going to be tested on a regular basis. And, a tool like, breach and attack simulation, automated red teaming, automated pen testing, this idea of continuous security validation is really important when it comes to security services.
Thanks, Aaron. The next question we have is, we currently do not have any offensive practices as part of our security operation program. Besides penetration testing, does Pantera require any on-staff personnel to use the tool?
Another great question. Great question, audience. Keep them coming. So first question is, the answer is no. One of the ways that Pantera is introduced to an organizations today is many use cases. But there is no need for on-staff person and with a red team type of activity and offensive mindset to be able to draw that. This is exactly when I said automation to augment, is how I can introduce to you this automated red team. So all of a sudden with that technology, you have it on staff. Now, I'm going back to my original point. Doesn't mean you should not have a red teamers in your team to be able to know how to work the operation to its max extent, how to better think about different security strategies you would like to point Pantera at and do the manual work for you. 100% yes, but I want to make sure it's clear. There is no need for you, if your organization that have not yet taken a step there beyond your yearly penetration testing, check a box, compliance-centric view. You should definitely look at Pantera to see how you can bridge this gap without having people first in place.
Thanks, Maur. The next question I received is, in an earlier slide, you noted that the large number of endpoint solutions in use. Do you have insights why that is occurring?
Yeah, so I can take this and or just jump in. But one of the things that we've seen is mergers and acquisitions are leading to the large number of solutions that are in place. What we've really seen, I think, most often is just failed security initiatives. So we had a tool we need to replace, but we're going to roll it out to those that don't have it. And before we even get the old one replaced, we're going to roll out yet a third one or a fourth one. In some instances, we do see very strategic initiatives around having multiple solutions in place because of environments, because they're multifaceted in many different industries, and certain security endpoint security tools are better equipped to handle certain environments than others. In many instances, it's not just that we have a set of endpoints that have one tool and a set of endpoints that have another tool. We're seeing many endpoints have many tools installed all at once. So, not only sometimes is there conflict and, performance issues, but configuration issues really start to become a problem. And as you start to gather all that point telemetry from all those different endpoint solutions, they're overlapping. They're not always agreeing with what they're seeing. So that's creating confusion as well. And Mauro, do you have anything to add to that from your perspective?
No, I think you're spot on. The merger and acquisition is something we see a lot. And also, as an industry, we've been talking a lot about there's no bulletproof. And because there's no bulletproof, many organizations have took this layered approach, which I'm a huge believer in, because there's not, again, we're going back, it's only as good as its weakest link, and maybe that one control can block this certain amount of threats, and this one control can do that one on the network. So we see a lot of controls acquisitions taking place introduced into your stack to fill in a gap. Yeah, that's a kind of layer defense is another kind of drive for that.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. The next question I have is, how does Pantera deal with NDA or legal agreement to simulate ransom attack or exploit?
That's a great one. So in order for Pantera to be able to trigger ransomware, think about it. It happens before there's any risk to the business. So right from the get-go, you now need to kind of operate the ransomware-ready emulation framework in your environment to be able to understand risk and impact. If you want to use that ransomware operation as a complete end-to-end red team activity to evaluate your blue team, or in this case, managed service provider, you can now go all the end, as what many organizations call today a tabletop exercise that's automated, and go all the way to its legal aspects and make sure that you're ready from a response to legislators in the hours that in the region where you're at, to be able to make sure your communication to the board and management is associated. So beyond just the detection response, you can now emulate a full end-to-end process, and as well as incident response, which I forgot, across your environment, beyond just the actual threat itself, but how this coexists with different departments you have as part of the response communication to other departments.
Thanks, Maul. Next question is, beyond testing our security stack, what other value does it offer?
That's a lot of great question, guys. Security stack is critical. And Aaron mentioned one aspect of a breach and attack simulation technologies that are able to kind of look at the controls and whether they're able to kind of prevent it or detect it and kind of give you this answer. However, I can tell you that, I'm going to make up a number right now, above 75% of our organizations, we identify security weaknesses that has nothing to do with controls. Whether it's traditional, LLMNR, SMB protocols that are not being implemented properly or removed from the system. It's your Active Directory password policy that is outdated, and you're still having the same user there with the same credentials for the past 5 years, and those can be easily sniffed or cracked. So this is where you need to think about Pantera not as a security control validation. That's a critical aspect. but you need to think about it as your entire security program across your network, across your segmentation, across your control, and that's and processes and blue team and red team. This is beyond just simple, okay, quote unquote, not really simple. This is beyond just traditional controls validation, but across your security program. That's how, when I think about security validation, I think about it holistically across your entire program. Take you another step in that maturity level.
You know, one of the things I've seen is up in the space with continuous security validation is, you know, it helps answer that question. You know, what happens is your executive team, your CEO, they see something in the news over the weekend and they say, are we prepared to stop this? Is this going to impact our organization? And, you know, I think what I hear from a lot of security teams is, well, we think, we hope, you know, again, going back to that, we're unsure. You know, what I found with the security validation tools is you can actually test that specific scenario against your infrastructure and be able to give that confident answer that I think a lot of security teams lack.
Thanks, guys. Next question I have is, how safely Pantera simulate the ransom attack?
Let me give you the, you know, data from the field. Right now, we've been running more than 5,000 tests since we launched it about a couple of months ago, and there has been 0 problems. But let me kind of double click to that. When we say safely, is we do the data encryption, and I mentioned that briefly. Before we encrypt the data, using the own adversary SALSA 20 algorithm, we could have taken the 2448. You always have handy the encryption key. When we encrypt the data, it is always on copy. So in case there's any reboot or any user using data in real time, this is completely seamless. In terms of data exfiltration, we said that I mentioned this kind of hello world outbound communication. We are not exfiltrating anything, never. So when I said we're sending data, the intent here is to validate your threat intel, firewall, blacklist, network visibility controls. And you have the granularity when you're setting up the ransom already to pick and choose each one of them and whether to approve the live exploitation or to just kind of say, what would happen if I'm not exploiting? So there's an extensive granularity in the hands of the user to try and choose whatever works best according to a trust. But again, trust is a big thing. Trust needs to be built and proven. What we're seeing many times is how they're taking a small chunk of endpoints and running the ransom already, and from there, once it's successful, gradually roll out to the entire infrastructure.
Thanks. And we have time for one last question. The last question is, our network architecture is currently in a hybrid state of both on-premises and cloud workloads. Looking at the threat landscape, are there any specific attack TTPs we should look at?
That is a great and relevant question. Thanks to whoever in the audience that asked that. One of the things we're seeing right now, although the hype on cloud security vendors right now is sky high, is that this is not yet the vector of choice. Just because, total cost of ownership on the attacker side, it is still easier for them to be able to socially engineer a password, use that to be able to get in, bypass a VPN, and use the same tactics and techniques they use today. However, what we are seeing as an extended attack vector is once I use that same techniques to gain into my on-premise stack, how can I then laterally move to my cloud infrastructure? So then you have a leg in to your on-premise and a leg out to your cloud infrastructure in your demilitarized DMV inside an AWS or Google Cloud or Azure AD. So this is a lot of attack techniques we're seeing more and more right now in the wild by Pentera Labs team's research. We're not yet seeing the full, like I'm going on the workloads directly, again, because of investment still required there. Aaron, what do you see anything else right now based on the feedback you get? Or
Yeah, I think you hit it pretty well. I think the only other thing we're starting to see is around APIs. I think as we move stronger to an API environment with a lot of systems and native cloud programming relying on functions and services consumed from other resources, API exposure, API vulnerabilities seem to be moving up as far as the number of attacks that we're seeing in that area.
Agree. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. That concludes our webinar for today. We will make sure to address all unanswered questions via an email after the event concludes. Thank you, Aaron and Maur. As a reminder, the on-demand version of this event will be available shortly. On behalf of Pentera and 451 Research, thank you for attending and have a great day.